In this room is terror. In this room is every parent and every teacher's worst nightmare. In this room are bullets, students' blood, and the body of a hero. In this room, two people came with murder in their heart and a plan to escape accountability in their mind. On a drizzly Tuesday in May, at a school 19 miles from where we sit right now, 24 students, almost all of them seniors, filed into that room right there to watch a movie about heroes and villains. And two people came there to massacre them. One of those people, one of the people who came there that day, the one who secured the weapons and loaded the weapons, the one who snuck them into the school, the one who blasted a hole in Kendrick Castillo and shot two other students. That person is in the courtroom with us right now. He's seated right over there. His name is Devon Michael Erickson. And on May 7th, 2019, he agreed to help kill his fellow students if he wouldn't be held accountable for it, and if maybe even he'd be considered a hero. Now, we don't have any recordings of what took place in that room, only the eyewitness accounts. But here at STEM, there are recordings and videos all around. And so what we do have is this. There's 107 in the middle, and there's a camera right outside that wall. And this captures the images of what took place during his shooting as it occurred. There's no sound. Next door to 107 is room 105. And at the time that this mass shooting took place, it was occupied by Miss Christian, a teacher. She was all by herself. She too experienced the shooting as it took place.
911, what's the address of your emergency? Hello?
There's a shooting at STEM School, Highland Science.
Okay, where is it at? Is it in the school or outside the school?
It's in the school.
Where in the school?
In the middle school.
Okay, in the middle school, we gotcha. Have you seen it or have you just heard it?
I heard it.
Okay, you can hear it. Okay, where are you at?
I'm locked in the classroom. I'm a teacher.
Okay, how many students are there with you?
I'm alone in the classroom. There's no homeroom period.
Okay, what is your name?
I'm Aaron Christian. Please come in.
Okay, Aaron, we have help headed that way, okay? As soon as you called me, I had it in, okay? What room are you in, Aaron? Aaron, what room number are you in?
I'm in 105.
105? Okay, Aaron, can you still hear the shots?
I hear the shooter screaming. I think he's running after me.
Okay, and can you only hear one? Okay, and you're in your closet, right?
I'm in the classroom.
You're in your classroom. Do you have your door locked, Aaron? Okay. Okay, Aaron, I want you to do exactly what you've been trained to do. I want you to have the door locked and I want you to stay in your classroom, okay?
Okay.
Okay. I want you to tell me exactly what you're hearing. Aaron, are you telling me, can you still hear him?
The lockdown code is going so well. Can you do much?
Okay, Aaron?
They made so many victims in that brief period of time in 107. I can't talk to you about them all. If I spent merely 2 minutes telling you about each of them, I would run out of time for opening statement. But we're going to hear from those people up on this screen. We're going to hear from those who were shot, and I'll be able to talk about more of them. Some of the names are up on the screen now. And of course, you'll hear about Kendrick Castillo. It's because of Kendrick that this didn't turn into something far more worse than it was. Now, to understand the players in this and how we got here, you first have to know that that other person that brought the guns to the school and pointed them at students and pulled the trigger, is this person right here. It's Maya McKinney. Maya is a transgender male who goes by Alec, and that's how you'll hear him referred to throughout this case. Now, Alec is angry. Alec is in some ways hateful and has people in 107 that she despises for the rumors that she believes they've started. And she wants to see them dead. She's also suicidal. She wants help in killing those people in 107. And so she turns to her good friend. And I know that ain't the way he looks right now, cleaned up for you. But that's the way he looked back on May the 7th, 2019. And he agrees, but he only agrees if he isn't going to be held accountable. And so the two of them concoct a plan. And it's a plan that they begin to talk about. They joke about mass shootings, but there's a sense of realism to it. And finally, they decide it's going to be on May the 7th. And this plan is as diabolical as it is deadly. It is as unbelievable as it is unconscionable. This plan involves them getting guns. And where are they going to get the guns? From the defendant's father's safe in his house. They're going to get those guns, and they're going to load them. They're going to do cocaine for courage. They're going to now have to make videos that make it seem like he's doing this against his will. They got to figure out a way to sneak the guns into school. But he's going to carve out time to warn his friend, Aaron Padgett, who's also in 107 at this time. And then they're going to kill people. They're going to pull the trigger. But then there's going to be a different kind of death. At the end of this, Alec McKinney is either going to die by suicide or the defendant is going to kill Alec and look like a hero. This was the victim hero story that they concocted for that May 7th mass shooting. But it fails, and it fails because of heroes. And you will get to meet those heroes. They have names like Brandon and Joshua and Gregory and Kendrick. And they are the reason there were not more dead and more shot. But post-failure, the defendant is taken into custody, and he provides a statement consistent with the victim hero story. He says, I only did what I did because I was threatened. I was scared. I was trying to save everyone. For us, though, we get to hear the defendant's statements. This interview, this lengthy, detailed interview, takes place only about an hour after he has killed Kendrick Castillo and shot 2 others. And you'll get to hear his words and compare those explanations to the other evidence in the case. On May 7th, 2019, the defendant before noon was going home, and this becomes part of the conversation with Detective Pereira, who's right over here. Before the defendant goes to fetch his partner, Alec, to come to his house to get Dad's guns, he tells Detective Pereira, I was going back to my house because I was going to call the police. And I was going to call the police because he was so concerned about how violent Alec was, and that Alec was going to visit violence on him or others. And so he was going to call the police, but he doesn't. And he doesn't because he says, I opened the garage door, Alec messaged him and told him to come back to STEM. And so he does. He leaves the house to pick up McKinney, Alec, and bring him home to get the guns. He says to Detective Pereira at the beginning of the interview, I did it because I was scared. But he never calls the police or anyone from his home. He never calls the police or anyone from his cell phone. And so later in that same detailed interview, Detective Pereira asks him, didn't you think it was a good idea, maybe, to tell an adult at that time? And this time, the defendant doesn't claim to be scared. His answer to that common sense question is, oh, I didn't call because I thought McKinney was just upset. That's why he wanted me to come there to STEM. Because I thought maybe he was just like sad. He wasn't violent or mad at everyone else. So they go back to the defendant's house at 1977 Mountain Maple Avenue. This is that nice house right there. The defendant claims that they went inside. They go down to the basement, and McKinney pulls out cocaine. And he says to her, or him, I'm not down with this. I don't want to do this. So McKinney does it all by himself. Defendant then says McKinney tells him to follow him up the stairs where the safe is, or he'd kill me. Defendant said that Alec told him, show me where the safe is, where I can get the guns. And so he takes him there. And then he says, Alec hits it a few times and told me to pull it out. And Detective Pereira says, what? Hit it with what? And now we hear the axe he got in my garage. And that's a new fact in that interview. This is the axe. This axe right here. He says, I never saw the axe the first time. And you know why he doesn't see that giant axe? Because he tells Detective Pereira, Alec had it behind his back, apparently with one hand. Detective Pereira asks, did McKinney already have it when you were upstairs? And he says, yes. And so now we have to talk about what happened in the basement again. And he says, I didn't see the axe behind Alec's back when we were in the basement and they were trying to get me to do cocaine. He said McKinney got it from the garage, must have, but he didn't see it. And that's when he pulled out the cocaine in the basement, he being Alec. He says to Detective Pereira, I told Alec, I am not okay with doing cocaine. So Detective Pereira asks him, had you ever done cocaine before? He says, no. But you're going to meet David Suspera. David Suspera is going to sit there in that stand right there. He is described by the defendant as one of his best friends since 6th grade. And what David Suspera is going to tell you is earlier that morning, on May the 7th, he and the defendant left STEM to go home to the defendant's basement, where the defendant pulled out a small brown pouch and they each snorted cocaine. He never tells Detective Pereira that fact. Now, Alec and the defendant go back upstairs, and they're at the safe, And the defendant tells Detective Pereira, we were hitting on the thing with an axe, but it wasn't working. So Alec, he says, makes him go back downstairs into the garage so they can get a crowbar.
This heavy, giant crowbar. And they go back from the garage.
They go back upstairs to the safe, and they start prying it to try to get to the guns they need. But they have to take time out. They have to take time out to make those videos that'll make sure that this defendant will not be held accountable for what he's doing. And it helps with the victim hero story. Now there's an app, many of you may know it, some of you may not, called Snapchat. And it is an app that exists on Alec McKinney's phone. And when Alec McKinney's phone is taken after this mass shooting, it is analyzed, and when it is analyzed, this is what it reveals about that time in those videos. It reveals that at 11:51 that morning, 2 separate attempts were made to make videos, but none of them were saved up into the Snapchat universe, so they went away. But the third video, that was saved, and it looks like this.
Fucking open it! Fucking open it!
Trying.
Cannot hold the axe with one hand while filming. That's the first video. Defendant gives no explanation as to why a video is made or even how he knows it's being made. They finally get the safe open, and it takes effort. And when they pull it open, they find the weapons they need. There's 4 of them. And as the defendant tells Detective Pereira about this, he identifies every gun by make, model, caliber, every round in the safe. There's a Glock 21. It's a 45 caliber handgun and a Ruger 22 rifle, and they look like this.
This is the Glock. This is the rifle brought to school. There's also a 9mm Beretta. That's this handgun here. And a Taurus 22 revolver that holds 9 rounds. They are all unloaded
When they break into that safe, but by the time they leave the house, they are all locked and loaded and ready for use. There are bullets in the chamber. The defendant tells Detective Pereira he'd been shooting before with those weapons with his dad 4 times before. He knew all about how to load them, gun safety, and where to put his trigger finger so the gun wouldn't accidentally go off. This is a picture of what they had taken out of the safe. You can see that's the rifle case with the rifle missing. He then tells Detective Pereira that Alec bought all the guns and put them in his backpack. And so Pereira asks, so you never touched them? You never touched any of the guns? And he says, well, I carried the ammo and then I didn't touch the guns until he made me put them in the guitar case. The guitar case that they would use to be inconspicuous and sneak the guns inside the school. This guitar case, which you will see, with that rifle and that Glock hidden inside of it with extra rounds. And I should tell you, they brought with them that day, in addition to what was loaded, hundreds of extra rounds. That's the guitar case found in 107, right by the door, on the other side of the picture that we looked at. In the guitar case that the defendant would take into the school in secret, he had the Glock 21, the hand cannon, the 45 caliber handgun that he blew a hole in Kendrick Castillo with and shot Josh Jones and Alex Woodford. The Ruger 22 rifle that you see right here, he also had. But in the backpack that Alec had, Alec took the 9mm Beretta and the 22 caliber 9-shot revolver. There's the revolver and there's the Glock on the carpet there in 107 That is the cylinder that shows the 9 rounds that go for the .22 revolver. They then paint on the wall with nail polish the verses win. He asks Alec to write on him with a Sharpie the word God across his chest. Alec then tells Pereira, the defendant tells Pereira, Alec ordered me to follow him, which is when he then recorded me forcibly making me do cocaine. He told me to do the cocaine, or this, his good friend, his closest confidant, would shoot him. But he says he told Alec I don't want to do it. But Alec makes him do it anyway. And guess what? More Snapchat videos. And the analysis of the phone shows that at 12:42, almost an hour later, and this will be almost an hour before he pulls the trigger, they have one take of the video, but it's not saved. At 12:43, they try another video. It's not saved. But at 12:44, they turn on the flashlight on that phone for better lighting. And this is the video that they get and save.
Fucking do it.
I'm sorry.
Hurry the fuck up.
So Detective Pereira asks, well, when did you do the cocaine? When did that happen? And he says, after Alec loaded all the guns. While holding the axe? And he says, well, obviously he wouldn't let me touch anything. So Detective Bird, who is also in the picture with Detective Pereira doing the interview, he asks the defendant, well, how is he loading the gun with multiple guns and the axe?
Four guns. He loaded them individually. It's not like he just started doing one mag at a time, one bullet. He loaded it and then pointed it at me. He loaded one in the chamber, cocked it, and pointed it at me. And started loading the other magazines. I knew I couldn't get out. I wouldn't be stupid. I was trying to save my friends. That's why I warned people. That's why I gave in and I'm trying to help you guys.
You know that. I'm a cop. So
I know you're a cop, dude.
I can't load a gun and point a gun at somebody at the same time.
If you put one bullet in there, and I look in the corner of this closet, worn out, freaking out because this person has been threatening to kill me, and just made me just hammer onto this thing with this crowbar. I'm all worn out. I don't have the energy to take this kid. And he's already stronger than me. I'm scrawny. I have no willpower like muscle. I literally couldn't take this kid.
No, that's what you think. Why would you in the house?
I was in the back of so in this closet in my mom's room, there's only one door. He was on that side. The safe's laid down in the middle. And I'm on the other side of the safe. He told me to stay on that side.
But what I don't understand is how else can you loading the gun?
Because he made me give him the bullets while holding the hatchets. He grabbed the guns with his other hand. And then that's when he made me hand him the ammo. Told me to sit down, still holding the hatchet, put one bullet in and put it in the magazine and cocked it so there's one in the chamber. He could aim at me.
Loaded the gun with that big hatchet in his hand and then pointed it at him. Next, Alec and the defendant go to the garage where they trash the defendant's mother's car and they spray paint on it. Fuck society. They put 666, a pentangle, and maybe an upside down 666. And then they proceed to try to set fire to mom's car using an accelerant right there, but they're unsuccessful. They load up the defendant's car, and the defendant drives them back to STEM. He drives. They arrive at school. He parks perfectly. At 1:24 p.m., they're caught by a camera outside the school, calmly, casually, walking in. When they get to the front desk, and you'll see video of this, nonchalantly, as the defendant enters with a guitar full of that rifle and that handgun, he gives a little hand wave to the front desk person. There it is. By 1:25 p.m., they're going to go to a hallway that splits up. And if you remember what 107 looks like, it has a door on one side and a door on the other. Those are the only two ways in and out. And they've made the decision that they're going to enter each of those doorways and keep people from fleeing. And so when they get to this first hallway, it's at the corner where 107 is down one of the halls. And so they part. But before they part, they give each other a quick bro hug and fist bump. And there they go. Now, defendant is late to class, and you should know, McKinney is a sophomore, 16. Doesn't belong in that class. All he knows about the people that have started the wars in the class from him. But he belongs in that class, and he's late. And when he gets to class, he runs into Mitchell Krause and runs into Lauren Harper, the teacher for British literature, which is taking place in 107. The class is watching The Princess Bride. They're about 20 minutes late. He goes in, he sits down in the guitar case, and he tells Lauren Harper, "I'm not feeling well." And he looks sickly. So she says, "Why don't you go at 1:27 with Mitchell? Mitchell, go take him down to the nurse's station." And the good kid that Mitchell Krause is, he takes him to the nurse's office. At 1:29, they're seen walking and chatting down this hall right here. They'll be coming from the upper right. Mitchell's going to sit in that stand right there too and tell you there was really nothing unusual about it. He seemed a little sick, but normal conversation. They then get to the nurse's station. Mitchell walks him in and stays with him. The defendant goes to sign in. Mitchell says, he seems nervous. He seems ill. Puts his hand on his back, asks him, "Are you good, man?" And the defendant tells him, yes. The defendant never alerts Mitchell to what's coming. By text, Alec reaches out a few minutes later to the defendant at 1:30 p.m. and says, "Hurry to come back for this mass shooting." It's 1:31, another text from McKinney. "I'm not doing this alone. I'll fuck you up, do what I fucking say." And that's it. That will be the last contact Alec McKinney has with the defendant for 16 long minutes. And during those 16 minutes, despite access to multiple people who only care about him, he tells no one. He does nothing. He tells Detective Pereira, I thought I was having a panic attack when all this was going on. 14 minutes, he is inside that nurse's office, and he never alerts anyone. But here's what he does do. He takes out his phone, and he tries to message his friend in 107, Aaron Paget, to get him to leave the classroom so he won't have to kill his friend. But he fails. "Please, leave the room. I got to tell you something." Never tells him what it is. But he failed to get him out of that room, and it did not stop his plan. You're going to hear from Carol Mappich. She works in that nurse's station. She said the defendant told her, "I'm not feeling good." So she sent him to the bathroom, and he was on for maybe not for a long time, 3 to 4 minutes. He tells Carol, "You know what, I'm not feeling good. I'm not getting along with my mother." And so he wasn't sleeping as well and was overtired. Never once mentions drug use. Never once mentions the shooting that he's about to participate in. And when she asks him if he thinks he's having a panic attack, he tells Carol, no. He lays down. They give him a place to lay down. They give him, he uses a sweatshirt for a pillow. They give him a cold pack for his head. They put him in a room by himself, and in that room, right by where he's laying down, is this red button. Hit that button, and in comes the cavalry. And he's there for 10 minutes and never touches it. He leaves the nurse's office. He tells Carol, I'm feeling better. And he wanted to go back to class. Never pressing that red button. He never alerts Carol to what's coming. Julie Wright, a counselor who knows the defendant well, and you will hear is working feverishly to try to make sure that he's going to graduate, because with 3 days left in his senior year, he ain't going to do it without help. Julie sees him and she says, look, the last time I see him, he's laying down with a cold pack on his head. And that caring person, the one who called him earlier in the day to get him to come back to class, he tells her nothing about his plan. You're going to hear from the nurse, Karen Lewis. Karen's going to say that the defendant told her that his mom had just had eye surgery and was having difficulty recovering. And that meant he had to help more at home, and so he wasn't getting much sleep. No one else heard that story. She saw no signs of a panic attack. She said he acted appropriately. And so for 14 long minutes, there is no contact of any kind with Alec McKinney. And yet he does nothing and he says nothing. He tells Detective Pereira that Alec told him to come back to class or he was going to come in the office and kill everybody. That was his excuse for not telling anyone and for leaving the nurse's station. The problem is, and said he was waiting for him and he'd kill everybody. The problem is, there are no such messages. There are no such texts. At 1:47 p.m., Alec is standing outside those doors, waiting for her partner in this mass shooting. She sends the last text, the first one in 16 minutes, and the last one before they begin shooting classmates. And that message is, we have it all planned out. And that's all he needs, because then he leaves. And Karen Lewis will say that he came out of the office saying he felt better, he wanted to return to class, and she told him, I'm glad you feel better, take care of yourself. She said he was very calm when he left. He never alerts Karen. Instead, he comes out of the nurse's station, and he and Alec go walk to 107 with the unsuspecting students and teachers sitting in the dark, watching a movie. You'll see them come down the hall in the upper right here. As any two friends would. And they split up. Coming down the hall, there appears to be no coercion, no cajoling, no hands in a pocket simulating a weapon, no hand on an arm convincing him to go. Then it goes down in 107. And Detective Pereira asks him what happens. And before we hear what everyone else said takes place, we should hear how the defendant describes this in the victim-hero story.
He told me to go around the other door because I was the one I was supposed to block, so he knocked on it and let me in. And I set down a suitcase and I went to Aaron and I tried to get him to leave one more time, but he seemed like he wasn't listening to me. He was pissed off, so I grabbed the suitcase and I was gonna leave, but then I saw Alec look at me and kind of nod at me because he knew I was trying to leave. So I opened the door again and I closed it and just opened the suitcase and told everybody to stay down, not move. And then I was just gonna run. And then Kendrick rushed at me and he kind of hit me, which is when the shot went off on him, which is what I didn't want to happen. I was trying to leave, and that's when I just gave up and put my hands out. I started yelling and saying, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, and like, I proof of it. So no one wants you to think I'm a fucking monster. My best friend Aaron was in that room.
That's his takeaway. Now everyone's going to think I'm a fucking monster. He talks to them more about what it was he was trying to do as he's describing this seemingly accidental discharge because Kendrick rushed him and how much he wanted to give up. And it sounds like this.
You pulled your gun out, you said, everybody get down, don't move. Everybody just don't move. And that's when Kendrick and Brandon both rushed me. Okay. And Kendrick hit me, which is the only reason. And I willingly just let Brandon grab the gun and take it, and then I immediately told him where all the other guns were, that Alex had a gun, what his name was, and I told everybody where my stuff was, where everything was. What was Alex doing when this was happening? I couldn't see anything because Josh and Brendan held me down. Okay. And then Brendan got all the guns gathered, and then I don't know what happened. I was just laying on the ground telling people information. So yeah, so Kendrick went to go tackle him? Kendrick and Brendan both at the same time just rushed against me, and they tackled me and hit me, which is when the gun I was holding went off. Okay. Did you see that anybody? Kendrick. Okay. I would have been Josh by him, but I don't know if that was how I heard it went through Kendrick, because I heard something say exit wound. Okay. So just went to the ground. Did you say anything to Kendrick or Brendan when they came at you? I told Kendrick and Brendan when they were rushing me, I started yelling no. And I was like, threw it down, and that's why I threw it down. And I was like, Brendan, no, I'm serious. Here's the gun, like there's another gun in there. Alec has 2 guns. He has a Beretta and the revolver, and he's trying to kill everyone.
Sounds like one shot. Sounds like he tried to say no and give up the gun and throw it down. They asked him, was your finger on the trigger for this?
Have you ever been shooting with your dad? Yeah, a few times they took the gun safety they taught me about, all the licenses and stuff from it was in a country called Florida, a gun club. What did he tell you about gun safety? I know how all the safeties work, not to point at people, obviously not to leave it loaded and just carry it around and stuff, always make sure to be safe and when it's unloaded and stuff, pull the slides back, leave all guns, ammo out away from the guns and stuff, and just why they were not reloaded or anything. Yeah, so I told you never point it at anybody. Obviously don't point it at people, obviously don't shoot people, that's just kind of a given, Anything about, where your finger should be? I like that until you're ready to shoot. What does that mean? To the side, so you don't hurt anybody. Obviously, so you don't accidentally fire the gun when it's loaded. So you put your gun like this to the side if you're holding a pistol or a rifle, you put it like that. Okay. And you never cock it before you're ready to shoot either. So away from the trigger? Mm-hmm. Okay. So, how many times do you say you've been shooting? Maybe 4 times total. Okay. So, how did Kendrick get shot? He got shot because my finger was right there still. I was still grabbing it, my finger's right there, and he bumps into me because they're rushing me, and they're actually hitting the barrel end of the gun with their body and grabbing me. Was your finger here? My finger was next to the trigger, but it wasn't over the trigger because I wasn't going to hurt anybody. I was just going to tell everyone to stay and run. So I tried to throw it down.
You don't cock it until you're ready to use it. His words. This is how it happened according to the evidence and everybody else in that room. The defendant comes back to class. We see him with Alec. Alec goes to the appointed door. He goes to the other one at 107. He goes inside. It's dimly lit. It's dark, but there are lights in the back, like the little ones that you might see hanging on a deck. There's a couple sun holes put into the ceiling, and the light reflecting from the Princess Bride. And he goes in and walks by Lauren Harper, and he sets down his case, or his case is set down, he goes by his case and he kneels down to Aaron Padgett and he tries to convince his friend to leave before he starts pulling the trigger, but he can't get him to go. Nonetheless, he picks up the guitar case. He comes around the end of the room. He gets to the doorway. He steps outside of that doorway, and two things happen. At 1:51, he sends a text to Alec McKinney and no one else. And it's the last text he sends. Go now. And he steps back in through that doorway, and that magnetic strip, which when removed, locks the door to people on the outside, is removed. He pulls out the gun. He points the gun at people. That Glock, locked and loaded. Finger on the trigger. He points it at the people in the classroom. And then the detectives say, well, hang on. Why didn't you just shoot Alec? You had the gun. You were there. Why not shoot Alec to stop this? And this is what he says. What if he doesn't shoot first? And I look like the crazy kid that was shooting up the school. That's what he's thinking? He has the gun pointed at people, and they will tell you, he says some version of nobody fucking move. And with those words leaving his lips into the air, up springs perhaps the most unlikely of heroes. This boy right here, Kendrick Castillo. And in an instant, he heads right towards the defendant and his gun, but he doesn't make it. Brandon Bialy will tell you, and Josh Jones came up right behind them, that the defendant shot Kendrick before he ever gets to him. He heard 1 to 2 shots before. There are 4 other witnesses that will say they heard shots before Kendrick got there or saw muzzle flashes from his gun. Dawn Holmes is the medical examiner here. She'll tell you that indications of a contact wound would include soot and stippling, and she'll explain what those things are. They're not present here. There's no soot. There's no stippling. While Kendrick is having a hole blown in him, and Brandon and Joshua begin to struggle with the defendant to get control of the gun, across the room, at the other entrance, the other potential escape, at the same time, and after the defendant begins to pull the trigger, Alec McKinney begins to pull the trigger on that Ruger with the 9 rounds. She shoots Mitchell Krause. He's shot in the back. He doesn't know it. In fact, what you'll find is none of these kids shot know it. He flees. He runs away, and it's as he's running away across the street that he begins to have trouble breathing. And he collapses. And it's his friend that comes up behind him and uses his sweatshirt to stop the bleeding. A good Samaritan in the neighborhood welcomes him under his home, takes him in there to try to continue to apply pressure and save his life until the paramedics can get there and take him to the hospital for surgery. Lucas Albertoni. Lucas Albertoni, I'll tell you about his injuries in a minute. Lucas Albertoni is shot 3 times. Jerry Montoya, also shot 3 times. This is Jerry. 3 rounds hit Jerry. 1 through his arm, the other one through his forearm, and the final one hits him in the head. But mercifully, it's a grazing wound on the back of his head. And it creates a lot of blood, but it's not lethal. He too flees. He runs away, as most did. And he gets all the way to the office near the front entrance with Lauren Harper and some others, and they huddle there until Detective Joe White, a sergeant, comes to the door. He's looking for video. He thinks there's a third shooter. They don't know it. They're looking for video to see what's going on in the school. He doesn't know if this is it. He pounds on the door. They demand a CID. He puts a badge up in the window. They open it, and there's Jerry Montoya. And Sergeant White will sit right there and tell you, without thinking, he picks up Jerry and throws him over his shoulder and runs for about a block before he finds paramedics. And when you see Sergeant White, you will see how incredible that is. This is Lucas Albertoni. He's shot in the shoulder. He's shot through both legs. He flees too. He runs away like the rest of them and doesn't know until they reach safety that the pain in him and others saying, hey dude, you're bleeding. Hey man, you're bleeding. But those bullets that were fired into Lucas Albertoni, they remain in him to this day. The doctor said, too risky to take him out. Leave him in. Jackson Bradbury. Jackson Bradbury was on the side of the room with Alec McKinney. And as the firing erupted, he took cover behind Lauren Harper's desk. But he tells himself, you can't live back here. You're not going to make it. You have to do something. And so he leaps over the desk and he tackles McKinney. Fights for the gun. Alec has fired 9 or 8 rounds at that point, and he is hit in his shoulder, doesn't know it. And you'll see this video that's coming up from the hallway, and look in the upper right-hand corner. You will see Action Jackson fighting with McKinney to get that gun. And you'll see after he subdues McKinney, Mike Pritchard, a teacher that you'll hear also, comes along and takes the gun away. But he leaves McKinney, doesn't know that McKinney's the shooter. He's focused on getting into 107 to try to save Kendrick's life. So McKinney grabs a second gun, the second gun that's over there, that 9mm Beretta, and pulls it out of the backpack and is intent on putting it to his head and pulling the trigger. But you know what? Doesn't know how guns work. Doesn't know how to take the safety off. And before he can figure out how to do it, McKinney's apprehended by an armed security guard. If you look in the upper right, he pulls his gun, points it at Alec, orders Alec to the ground, willingly complies, putting the gun down. All of a sudden, death didn't seem that great. Back across the room, the defendant is still struggling with now those 2 live bodies still fighting with him. Contrary to the assertion that the gun just went off, the defendant pulled the trigger 4 times, and he was stopped from pulling it a 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th because there was a malfunction. But before that time, he's able to shoot Josh Jones in the hip and throw him through his calf with that hand cannon. Alex Watford wasn't even in 107. He was next door in 109. And he went to the ground as they all did when they heard the shooting. But one of the defendant's bullets went through the wall and struck him in the foot. He would have kept pulling the trigger. But during the scuffle, the slide on that gun fails to move back far enough to eject the last shell and seat into the barrel another one. And so it wouldn't fire anymore. He couldn't have fired any more rounds. Brendan Bialy, Josh Jones, they take him to the ground and they will tell you, they describe it as a fight. It was a struggle. And while he is face down on the ground, Brendan Bialy will tell you that the gun that he's holding begins to tip back towards them over his head. and he has to grab his hand and peel his fingers off of the gun to keep him from shooting it. Brad doesn't know it's malfunction. When he's finally subdued, and only when he's finally subdued, only then does he say, Alec made me do it. Mike Pritchard goes and tries to tend to Kendrick. And I think everybody that you'll hear from that had the opportunity to try to help him and to take him out of that building, that they were all hoping against hope, but they knew he was already gone. It was too late. But he still had to tell the story to be either a victim or a hero. When this case is over, when you have heard all the evidence, and there'll be a lot of it from both sides, when you have considered the law and the arguments of the defense, I'm going to ask you to go back and remember these things. And when you've been given the instructions on the law and what the charges are, murder, attempt murder, with intent after deliberation, extreme indifference, arson, criminal mischief, and all the others, I'm going to ask you to come back right here and hold him accountable for what he did in helping to try to murder a classroom full of students. Thank you.
Thank you. Does the defense wish to present an opening statement?
This is a case about mental health. It's a case about manipulation. It's a case about how Devon Erickson's home life came undone, leaving him neglected at a critical time at the end of high school. It's a case about how rapidly a young person's rationality, ability to make decisions deteriorates after a few months of serious drug abuse, sleep deprivation, and weight loss. And it's about how a sensitive and vulnerable kid, Devon Erickson, gets roped in to a psychotic cult play by a schizophrenic, homicidal, sick kid named Alec McKinney. Opening statements are a time where lawyers can comment on the evidence that the jury may hear and the evidence that the jury needs to grapple with throughout the trial. In this trial, there are a lot of things that you don't have to grapple with. The fact that there was a shooting at STEM School, the fact that a young man, Kendrick Castillo, lost his life way too soon, that many other kids were seriously injured, that there were heroes, Josh, Brendan, Kendrick, Jackson, Miss Harper, Mr. Pritchard. The fact that the community was rocked by this, and the children of that school were extremely afraid. Those facts are undisputed by the defense. Those are not the facts that you have to grapple with in this trial. The government has to prove the charges beyond a reasonable doubt. They have to prove this was intentional. They have to prove this was deliberate, premeditated murder and premeditated attempt murder. You're not going to hear any evidence from the prosecution of any great hatred, manifestos, diary entries, statements on social media, intending to want to hurt anybody at STEM, intending to want to kill any person. Because Devon Erickson did not intend to help. Devon Erickson is not a demon. He's not a monster. It's not working? Okay. Can you switch the...
You guys have to select they have to deselect, and then you have to select yours to presentation.
Okay. I'm sorry for the pause. Devon Erickson is not a demon. He's not a monster. He's not evil. He's a funny, witty, sarcastic kid who grew up in Highlands Ranch with lots of long-term, really great friends, some of whom will come in here and testify during this trial. He had girlfriends. He had hobbies and things that he was very into. He started out at about age 8 with his love of music, guitar playing, singing. He performed at STEM's talent shows, and in fact won 4 out of the last 5 of them. He enjoyed and cared about being inclusive of all people. He really took it to heart when people were bullies to others. And he liked everyone, no matter what kind of a person they were. This is Devon Erickson a couple of months before May 7th of 2019. Normal, happy, funny kid who really was into music and playing games with his friends, playing computer games. Didn't know Alec McKinney at that time. Can you go next? Here's Devon performing, something he loved to do. And, people were receptive to it. He was a mentor to many of the people in his music school. And you may hear from some of those people who talk about him mentoring the younger students. Devon Erickson hadn't met Alec McKinney at that time. But at about February of 2019, Devon started to feel depressed and anxious. And it was about at that same time that Devon's mother started to have some very serious problems. She had an eye surgery that went wrong. And because of that eye surgery, she was afraid that she may become blind. She had another type of surgery that went wrong, and she ended up in a series of panic attacks. She started to have panic attacks every single day. She would stay up all night crying. She would scream and slam cupboards. And this was all a very new thing for Devon Erickson. His family life was just starting to fall apart at this moment. He grew up with a stay-at-home mother who was on him every single day, a helicopter parent, making sure he'd get his homework done. He had some ADD, so it was hard for him to concentrate in school, and she was there making sure he was okay, giving him lots of vitamins. And you'll hear that she didn't believe in medication. So when he expressed that he had been feeling depressed and was sad, her thought was vitamins, not medicine. So Devon's mother is completely falling apart at this time. His father is on another planet, just completely focused on the mom. And his older sister had been out of the house, but she had always kind of been sucking the air out of the room over the past few years because she was having a major problem with alcohol. So Devon finds himself pretty alone and pretty vulnerable at this time. And in comes Alec McKinney. Alec McKinney, next one. Alec McKinney is a kid who was born a girl, had changed gender years before coming to STEM school. He had been consumed by schizophrenia for many years. And he had had homicidal thoughts since he was 11 years old. He came into Devon's life at a time, he came into Devon's life at a time when Devon was vulnerable. And Alec McKinney, you will hear from his own words that he is a manipulator, that he knew Devon was an idiot, that he was planning to do a school shooting, that he wanted to hurt people, and that Devon didn't know anything about it. And you'll hear also that Alec McKinney was able to pull the wool over so many people's eyes throughout his life, his young life. Nobody at school knew that he hated all of them. He was always the laughing, joking person. He had a good personality. People found him funny and fun. They didn't know what was going on in his brain. In fact, he had been hospitalized multiple times at Jefferson Hills, at Devereaux, at other serious inpatient centers for suicidality. And he would always say, I tell the doctors that I'm suicidal, but I make sure not to tell them I'm homicidal, because that'll land me back in the mental hospital again. Can we skip forward too? Alec McKinney, in his own words, says, they knew I was suicidal, but they didn't know I was homicidal. He's talking about his doctors. His mother tried to get him help over and over again. He didn't tell her about his homicidal thoughts, about how he wanted to kill his own family. He was violent towards his own brother. He had thoughts of harming them. And in the same way, he was able to take over the mind of Devon Erickson in a very serious way at a very vulnerable time in his life. When Alec McKinney meets Devon Erickson, he introduces some very serious drugs into Devon Erickson's life. Prior to that, Devon, maybe smoked some marijuana, something like that. But Alec McKinney starts buying cocaine. You'll hear from him. He always bought the cocaine. He had a job at Jersey Mike's so that he could fund this. He stole all the Xanax from his mom, from his grandmother. He was taking 12 Xanax a day himself. And he was feeding these drugs to Devon Erickson. They were doing drugs together. Alec had a friend at the time named Sophie. He'd already gotten her so hooked on drugs that she was basically addicted at that point. And right before May 7th, the week before, Sophie ends up in rehab because she's gotten so sick. Sophie and Devon begin dating. So in the timeline, what's important to note is Devon Erickson had these good friends. He had been at STEM since 6th grade. He didn't hate STEM. He didn't hate anybody. He had no intention to kill. He's not a monster, he's not a demon, and he's not evil. He's a confused adolescent kid. When Alec McKinney comes into his life, Alec begins his series of manipulations, trying to convince Devon, you know what? You need somebody to give you attention? I'll give you that attention. I'll give you drugs. I'll make you feel good about yourself. And that's what Devon needed at the time. And that's what happened. They become this little group. He and Devon and Sophie, he and Alec and Sophie begin hanging out together and doing all these drugs. You're going to hear from doctors, both Dr. Guidry, who's a toxicologist, and also Dr. Scott Wiley. He's a psychiatrist and a pharmacologist. They're going to talk to you about the things that were going on in Devon Erickson's body. The repeated, prolonged use of massive amounts of drugs, methamphetamine, cocaine, and over-the-counter cough and cold medicines at mass quantities that Devon was taking over and over and over again. And you'll see when you look at those videos of the day of this shooting how skinny Devon was. He was wasting away. He was wasting away. His mind wasn't right at all. He wasn't sleeping at all. And then his mom goes to Arizona for inpatient treatment. So for the last 3 weeks of high school, his mom is gone. His dad is totally consumed by that. And Alec is there. Alec is there as the puppet master, the manipulator. You're going to hear from a counselor, Julie Wright. Julie Wright was the school's counselor at STEM. She worked tirelessly with kids to make sure that they would graduate, to make sure they had all the support that they needed. And she was the counselor for both Alec McKinney and Devon. She will tell you that she talked to Devon every single day, that his grades started to really slip at the end of school, that she was really worried that he might not graduate, and she was on him every day. She spent a lot of time with him. And as she is being, and she also counseled Alec. And Alec, she said, she was on him, offering him extra services, offering him extra tutoring and after-school help. You will hear from her in the moments after the shooting. She's on a body camera video or audio, and she's being told that this shooting that just happened, that she experienced, happened with 2 boys, Devon Erickson and Alec McKinney. And she says she's shocked. She's floored. She doesn't think that Devon, never would have thought that Devon would have done something like this. She saw him that day, right before this shooting, and he was pale, he was sweating, he was having a panic attack. She had brought him into the bathroom, told him to go in there and wash his face, and she waited outside because she was really worried about him. She could see that there was something really wrong with him. He was having a panic attack because he didn't want to do what Alec wanted him to do. Julie Wright will tell you that Alec McKinney made the story make sense for her for the first time. She said, "Oh, now that I know that Alec is there, I know why this happened." He said, "Alec preys on vulnerable kids, and Devon is a vulnerable kid." She was asked who would be the mastermind. She said, Alec McKinney. She was asked, was Alec bullied? She said, no, Alec is a bully. And then she said, he is a puppet master, a puppet master. That was what was said right as she leaves the school and she finds out the names of these 2 students who she knows very well. And that is the thing that the government did nothing to look into. It is a tragic story of what happened that day, and no one is going to say that Devon Erickson did nothing wrong, that he didn't make a series of just horrible decisions with horrible repercussions. But it's still a story of human emotion, what he wanted to do, what he was intending to do, and why. And you're going to hear from an adolescent psychiatrist who specializes in treating adolescents all day long and teaching on adolescent brain development. She will tell you that there is no difference in the adolescent brain between a 16-year-old and a 19-year-old. Devon was just 18 at the time. She's going to talk to you about impulsivity and rational decision-making and how different that is as we all sit here well over the age of 25 or 30, most of us, and we think about, I would have pulled the fire alarm, I would have called the police, I would have done all these different things. But, she's going to talk about the problems with that line of thinking, that it's not a straight line for adolescents, that they don't always know what to do or make the best decisions, and they don't think about the consequences of their actions until later. On May 6th, 2019, Alec McKinney sent a text to Devon. The text said, "Don't go to school tomorrow." "Don't go to school tomorrow" is code for there's going to be a school shooting. And it's a joke that you will hear these students talk about. Almost everybody said at STEM. Astoundingly, these kids joked about that all the time. Hey, don't go to school tomorrow. Hey, just joking around. But Devon had some insight. Not that Alec was homicidal, but some insight that something was off with Alec that day. And when he said, "Don't come to school tomorrow," Devon's response was, "Alec, please don't." The next morning, after Devon stayed up all night, doing drugs, not sleeping, he gets up in the morning and he texts his friend David Cispera, really good friend, and he goes to school, and he and David then leave, maybe thinking that they'd go to McDonald's or something, but they ended up going back to Devon's house, and they do snort cocaine. And that wasn't the first drug that Devon had done that day. But they have this conversation, and it's a really good conversation. Devon says, "Oh, I've been so worried about my mom, and I'm finally thinking she's getting some help. It makes me feel hopeful for her, that she's going to get this help, and she's going to come home, and she's going to be okay, and my family will be okay." And they talk about plans for the summer and the internship at the voice school that Devon was looking forward to. And they talk about the concert tickets that Devon had saved up for and purchased to go to a concert with his dad later on that week after graduation. These are not the things that somebody talks about when they are planning a mass shooting, when they are planning to kill, when they intend to hurt. He did not hate STEM. He did not hate the kids in classroom 107, and there's no evidence that you're going to hear that the government is going to give to you to show that. They're going to show actions and decisions and things that don't make sense because it's complex. But we are not going to see any time during this trial a writing, an obsession with Columbine, any of those things from Devon. But, on the next slide, we will see that from Alec McKinney, the puppet master. He said, "I've had homicidal thoughts since I was 11. That's why I started self-harming. I thought I deserved it for having those thoughts." Basically, I never talked about my homicidal thoughts because I knew it would land me in another mental hospital. When people ask me, "Do you have homicidal thoughts?" when I was going to the hospital, I would say no. Easier to sweep under the rug than actually deal with it. And the voices, the schizophrenia, the source of his homicidal thoughts were the voices. Alec McKinney, while sad that he was consumed by schizophrenia, that he was that mentally sick, was a manipulator. He was somebody who could pretend and he pretended every day at school that he liked everybody and that he got along. But really, he hated these kids. And you're going to see social media about him where he says things like, I hate STEM so much. I hate these kids. He felt bullied by them. He felt that people weren't treating him with respect as far as his transgender status, that they weren't treating him like he was a man. Some people would call him by his given name, Maya. He was angry. He was angry with them. On May 7th, after Devon has this conversation with David Cispera, one of his best friends, they have a big hug. David's feeling like, oh, great, Devon's feeling better. His home life is going to be better. Things are very positive. And Devon's a hugger. So they hug, they go back to school. Then Devon later goes and leaves the school again to see his girlfriend, Sophie. She's just gotten out of rehab. He picks her up at school and they sit in the car for a while. And she gives him a journal that she'd been writing while she was in treatment. And they talk about how it's time to stop using drugs and things are going to be good. It was a loving, good conversation. No hint of homicide, no hint of intent to kill, of intent to harm, of hatred of STEM, of hatred of anyone. Then Devon has to go back to school. He doesn't want to miss all of his classes. He knows that he needs to get his community service handed in so he can graduate. And Alec McKinney says, hey, let's go back to your house. They go back to Devon's house. Devon walks in. He walks towards his bedroom to walk downstairs. Alex behind him. Now, Alex has been to his house before, but, they've only been friends for, 6 to 8 weeks before all of this. They didn't know each other before. And Devon goes downstairs, and what he sees, and you'll hear from Alex's own mouth, Alex says, I went downstairs, I started looking everywhere for the keys, I grabbed the axe, and I took it upstairs, and I told him, we're gonna fucking open your dad's safe. We're gonna fucking open it. I need a gun, and you're gonna open it. He will also say, and you will hear that he told the police this on May 7th, that he had been planning a school shooting. He had decided for sure to do it about 3 weeks before, and that he never told Devon. Devon didn't know. Devon had no idea what he was planning. Alec McKinney, you will hear, was obsessed with Sol Pais. Sol Pais was the woman who came from Florida to Colorado around the anniversary of Columbine, which had been about 2 weeks before May 7th of 2019. She had come here because she was obsessed with Columbine. She had a website with a huge following that Alec McKinney followed. He was a cult follower of hers. He admired her. He thought it was great that she was able to scare people like she could. He tells police that day, May 7th, right after the shooting, completely calm, completely unaffected, flat affect, that he wanted to hurt everyone at STEM. He wanted to scare them. He wanted to kill as many people as he could and then kill himself. And that Devon didn't know what his plan was. That he forced Devon to come with him that day, and Devon was trying to get out of it. So they go into the basement, and when you see these videos, the videos that I'm talking about, like this one, when you think about the idea that Mr. Brockler gave you, that these two plan this together and that Devon Erickson is somehow a ringleader, and look who's in control during this video.
Open it! Fucking open it!
Trying.
Devon Erickson in that video is obviously impaired. I mean, he's been doing drugs all day, all night, hasn't slept in weeks. You're going to hear from the doctors about how that affects somebody's brain and ability to deal with these things. But Alec McKinney is a bully. And he's a bully and a manipulator and a puppet master. He gets people to do what they want him to do. Let's look at the next one. And see how
What's he doing?
skinny he is.
Do it. Hurry the fuck up!
Devon is 90 pounds. He has been ravaged by methamphetamines, cocaine, the cough medicines, all of those things, along with depression and anxiety. And he is just not in a good place that day, in a place where he knows how to stop Alec McKinney, but he doesn't want to kill. He doesn't want anything bad to happen to his friends. All of his best friends were in classroom 107. So he goes back to the school with Alec, and he'll say that he goes to his first class, Miss Harper's class. He knows he needs that class to graduate. And so he's going to the class to check in and say, hey, I'm here, but I am sick. I have to go home. He's not with Alec at this moment, and he says, Miss Harper, I really feel sick. I really need to go home. I'm going to grab my bag and I'm going to go. This is right after the two had entered the school and separated ways. Ms. Harper says, no, I don't want to send you home. You got to stay at school. Mitchell Krause, please walk him down to the nurse's office. You will hear from people that saw Devon that he was white, he was panicking, he was sweating, he didn't know what to do. His mind is just completely scrambled at that point, and he's freaking out. And you will hear him say that he's freaking out, trying to figure out what to do. Is Alec being serious? Is Alec really going to do something? You know, Alec said he really wanted to hurt this kid named Chris Kretzman. Is he really going to do that, or is he just saying it? Should I tell someone? So he goes to the nurse's office. He's shaking as he signs his signature to sign in. He's very polite and nice to Mitchell Krause on the way there. He tells him, look, I really feel sick. I really think I should just go home. And Mitchell says, no, I'm supposed to get you to the nurse. So let's just keep going. He wants out. He wants out of this. He doesn't want to do what Alec wants him to do, which is guard the door. He doesn't intend to kill. He doesn't want to hurt anybody. He sees Julie Wright, and she tells him to go into the bathroom and wash his face because he's having a panic attack. And he says, oh, it's about my mom. I'm still worried about my mom. And that is true, but he was really worried about Alec and what to do, and he was having an inner conflict. This is not a kid who's trench coat clad, loaded up with guns, and walking confidently into a school to start shooting it up. Not at all. And he spends that time in the nurse's office trying to figure out what to do, and his brain just isn't working. He's just not able to figure it out, not able to function. He thinks, if I leave, what if Alec hurts my friends? What if he shoots somebody? What if he shoots himself? Maybe I can go and get everybody out of the room, or I can go and I can shoot Alec. Maybe I can do something to stop this, because that's what he wanted. He wanted to stop it. Not that his actions make sense, because there's no way to make sense of this. But that's what he was thinking. That was his mental state at the time. He goes into that classroom. It's dark. He gets his bag. He has to knock on the door. And one of the students opens the door for him. He gets in. The door's automatically closed and locked from the outside. And he grabs his gun, not sure what to do. and you'll hear from different students about different things that are said, but Josh Jones, one of the kids who was shot, says that he says, "Nobody move." And he points the gun up, not towards anybody. The only person standing really in the room towards where he would have been pointing is Alec. All of the other kids are seated. He never points it at anyone, and immediately Kendrick Castillo jumps up and slams him into the wall. He's 90 pounds, he's impaired, he's intoxicated, and Kendrick Castillo heroically jumps up to stop him, and at that moment slams him into the wall. And two other boys, Brendan and Joshua, get up and immediately start punching him and beating on him. And the gun goes off. The gun goes off more than once. His finger must have been on the trigger. You are going to hear from an expert. He is a physiologist. He is a very, very experienced kinesiologist, and he studies the kinesiology of human movement. And he's going to talk about how when somebody is off balance, when they get attacked, when they're being punched, when they're being thrown to the ground, it is your finger can pull the trigger, and it can pull it more than once. And that's how there are tests that they do, you'll hear, tests that they do with police officers, trained police officers, brand new police officers, and everybody across the board puts weight on that trigger pull during their tests when they do this type of exercises. And he's going to explain to you how that can happen unintentionally, accidentally. You can also see what happens at the end, the minute that Devon is down and Joshua is laying on top of him. He's immediately screaming, "Oh God, Alec has guns, go stop him, stop Alec." And he's yelling and he's saying he's sorry and he's crying immediately. His behavior is not somebody that was planning to do something like this or wanted this to happen. He's screaming and crying and he has this overwhelming emotion. Meantime, nobody knows who's standing in the corner. Alec McKinney. Nobody sees him because Devon says nobody moved. They all look to him. Everyone that gets shot thinks that they got shot by Devon somehow. They don't realize that Alec McKinney is unloading his gun, pointing it at kids and trying to kill them. You'll hear Alec McKinney calmly say that he saw Mitchell Krause on the floor, and he looked up at Alec, and Alec pointed the gun at him and shot. He shot at everybody and anybody that he possibly could. He knows guns well enough to do that. He was in the back. He harmed many students until Jackson Gregory slams him to the ground and wrestles with him. And Miss Harper jumps on top of him too, and they're able to get this gun away from him. Meanwhile, he bit Jackson Gregory as hard as he could to get Jackson off of him. They all leave Alec there and go back into the classroom, not realizing that Alec had another gun. So Alec goes back into the classroom. He gets a second gun. And we don't know if he shoots it in the classroom and a bullet's not recovered, but we'll see. He then comes out and he points it at his head because this was going to be his last act of fear. He wanted to put fear in everybody, and he wanted everyone to see him dead in the middle of that classroom. But he was apprehended. The demeanor between Alec McKinney when he tells calmly his story of intention and his plan and his manipulation, you will hear it from his own words. And the story that George Brockler told you in his opening is the story that was given after about 8 months into this case, after his arrest, after Devon Erickson's preliminary hearing, after months of consultation with lawyers. Alec McKinney comes in and gives a whole different story. The story of, we planned these videos. words that were said by Mr. Brockler at the preliminary hearing before the proffer given by Alec. So the government has made a deal with the sick, psychotic, schizophrenic kid. They've made a deal with him. He's got a motive to say what they want him to say, and he's going to come in here, and the government's going to say that the reason that they know what's going on in Devon Erickson's mind, and that Devon planned this together, and that this stuff is fake, and that he wasn't really scared, comes from one source, Alec McKinney. Not a reliable source. Not the kind of source that provides proof beyond a reasonable doubt of what's going on in somebody's head. And keep in mind when you listen in this case to the demeanor of Alec McKinney talking about his homicidal thoughts and his desires, and looking at Devon Erickson and how he behaved after the shooting. He expressed regret, remorse. He said Kendra Castillo was a good guy. I can't believe this happened. I can't believe I did this.
My house might be on fire as well. It's next to Thunder Ridge. He tried to light my mom's car on fire. There's animals in the house.
Look, they sent somebody to his house. They sent somebody to his house. You said he tried to light his house on fire.
My pets are in there. You lit your house on fire? No, he tried to, I like the other shooter.
All of this makes no sense when you look at it as an adult, rationally now sober. But this is a kid who loved his animals. This is a kid who loved his mother. This is a kid who loved his friends and family and his school. He did not intend to do this. He's not evil. He didn't hate STEM. He didn't hate the world. And he is not guilty of first-degree premeditated murder or first-degree intentional attempt murder. Thank you.
Thank you.